Like a week away from this room in space is an imagination defying level of abundance of natural resources. It will change the destiny of our species. And beyond that, there is more.
Thousands of companies show up to sell their technology to the U.S. Department of Defense each year. But so few will transition from proof of concept to true production across the valley of death. The select few who do, their stories are rarely told. Until now. I'm Noah Sheinbaum, and this is Crossing the Valley.
We're here at the Kennedy Space Center, ahead of the United Launch Alliance's first rocket launch of 2025. ULA is a collaboration between defense behemoths Boeing and Lockheed Martin, and they've been the legacy player in the space launch industry. The companies face significant headwinds and disruption at the hands of Elon Musk's SpaceX, Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, and yet they've persevered. I got to sit down with CEO Tory Bruno to talk about his time at the helm of ULA since 2014, the company's development projects and its past, as well as its plans for the future. Hope you enjoy.
Tory, thank you so much for making time on a launch day, no less.
No, I'm happy to do it. We have a little bit of downtime. We're in the early part of the count. So yeah, let's have a conversation.
Not many people have ever had or will have the chance to actually launch a rocket. Walk us through launch day for you. What happens when we leave this room?
Well, you're absolutely right. It is stressful. I've lost count. I'm over 400 launches. And I will tell you, it never gets old. It's always the same. I get butterflies every single time. The record here is amazing. You know, the mission success on this team is incredible. But I've been doing this for, like 40 years. And I have seen rockets that didn't go well.
Yeah.
So I know what it's like. And that's why it's stressful for me. This crew's been working super hard. We rolled out to the pad yesterday. There was a whole effort for that, and then we planned for them to go home and rest, and then they come back. They've been on console already for hours. Mm-hmm. So we'll get the vehicle ready, and we're testing it, we're fueling it, we're monitoring everything that goes on. Any little thing that looks different gets boarded in this time when we have time to think. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the key thing about launching a rocket, you want to do all your thinking ahead of time. And so you're not trying to deal with a big volume of stuff in the final part of the count. You want it to be as routine as you can. And today, this is a pretty clean vehicle, and the thing we're focused on is weather.
Yeah.
We're looking at a really windy day, and we don't like winds on the ground because when the rocket is coming off the pad, especially in this configuration, so an Atlas with a really big 5-meter payload fairing, and we've got 5 solids on it, it's a really big sail. And if the wind is blowing it back towards the mast, that's not good. And so we have limits for that. And right now we're just kind of hovering right around that limit, and we're hoping the wind dies off. The other thing we'll be watching, like on a day like today, is, we're in Florida. We occasionally get thunderstorms here.
It's been known to happen.
Like every day. And we don't like to fly through a cumulus cloud because we don't mind rain, and we don't mind winds aloft. But we don't want to be blown into the pad, and we don't want to experience lightning.
It's a lot of different things, a lot of different moving pieces. What's the role of the CEO on launch day?
Yeah. It's making sure everybody else has what they need. So over the years, I have been the responsible engineer on a piece of hardware. I have been on console. I've done all those things. But my role now is not to do that. I'll be here on console because I can't help it. But what I'm really doing is making sure the guys have what they need. So I came out this morning. I went out to the pad. I always have to go out and visit my rocket. I might touch it.
Do you have? Are there some?
There's rituals.
Some
yes.
Rituals, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure in some of them, but not all.
Okay, now
you don't even want to know all of them. And so I'll go out there and I'll make sure the guys that the morale is good and that nobody's overly stressed out, and that everybody has what they need if they're working something. And there's always something you're looking at when you're this far out, because you have the luxury of doing that. And then we'll come back here to the ASOC, and we'll get settled where the data is coming in, so we can watch what is interesting. And as I said a minute ago, today it's the wind.
Yeah. Well, we are praying for a launch. I've never seen a rocket launch before, so I'm hoping, fingers are crossed, that we get to see it today. I'm gonna ask you one question before we move off this, which is, do you remember your first Do you remember the first rocket launch?
Oh yeah, I sure do.
What was your role? How'd it go?
Yeah, I was a responsible engineer for a control system on a Trident 1 missile, which was actually launched out of here, just off the coast. In fact, it's a launch that's kind of goes on here several times a year, and there's one, I probably can't say exactly what it is or when, so I won't. But let's just say there's one down here.
Sure. And this is why you were at Lockheed?
Yes, this is while I was at Lockheed. And that one was pretty clean, so that was a good day. And then it wasn't that many more launches later that we didn't have a good day. And this is ironic. Now you're asking me this question, I hadn't even thought about it. We lost the nozzle off our rocket, and it wasn't benign like when we shed the exit cone liner off our Cert 2 Vulcan rocket. There's only one nozzle on this rocket, and it was what was used to steer the vehicle, and we lost it. And I won't say which rocket it was. And that particular vehicle actually lost that at the end of its first stage flight. Just as it staged, the upper stage flipped around and was flying back towards the pad.
Oh boy.
We don't like that. And fortunately, the control system, which I was responsible for, was robust enough to get it pointed back around the right direction. It did actually go on and complete its mission.
Really?
Yeah, so
That's got to feel good.
it did feel good after it stopped
you,
being
right?
completely terrifying.
Roller coaster, right?
Yeah. Well, you never want to fly your rocket back at the pad. I mean, it's bad luck.
Was there like duck and cover? Did we get that far along, or you guys?
Yes, no sirens went off.
Oh my gosh.
And it would not have come back onto the pad. It had a very proficient, destruct system, but the sirens went off and people had to get to certain places. And then the destruct system did not go off because it flipped around fast enough and got back on track.
Well, what they say, it didn't kill you, so it just made you stronger. So there you go. Wow. No, I mean, Tori, there's a lot to talk about. I think, the framing for this is super interesting. You all are, in some ways, the legacy player in the space launch business, formed of two behemoths. You talked about your safety record and the mission success record, 100%. I know that's a source of huge amounts of pride here. You have a parent in Boeing who has had a checkered record over the last few years. You all have managed to kind of uphold that record of performance. If I were a naysayer, you might say, well, maybe you guys aren't taking enough risk on that if you're at 100%. How do you think about that safety record?
Yeah, well, that record was established with mature systems. And so every time you launch a rocket, it is risky. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Rocketry is like that. It is different than satellites. It is different than airplanes, different than other aerospace products. You don't really have space for very much redundancy on a rocket. Mm-hmm. It's one rocket, one booster, one rocket engine. You can't have extras that you're not using.
It's expensive.
It's so powerful and it's so complex. Everything has to work. Nothing can go wrong. So we'll just start there. There's a baseline level of risk anytime you light it. And Delta and Atlas were very mature systems, and the Atlas V and the Delta IV they're numbered because they're successive generations. And so that is part of achieving that record. And the part that I think people are focused on when they ask that question is, well, what about the new technologies that constitute that kind of risk? That really wasn't part of what was done here until just now when we introduced the new rocket, the Vulcan rocket. Now, I have a lot of experience with that. I've done a good 36 different systems. I've had 36 different first flights.
Yeah.
And I have had successful rockets. I have blown rockets up. And so I understand that very, very well. We take the level of risk here that is necessary through this heritage program to get the mission done without endangering a precious, one-of-a-kind, upon which lives depend, spacecraft for our customers. And we do everything we can to guarantee their success. That was why ULA was set up. Before I came here, right, 2006, what was going on? The country was looking at a crisis in space. The generation of spacecraft that are on orbit now that we put there for national security were all late. and by years, by the way, primarily because the technology on those platforms was all brand new and it's eye-watering, still is today. And the stuff that it was replacing were all aging out at the same time. Not on purpose, it just worked out that way. And so the country expected to have big gaps. Like there would be places on the earth without GPS. There would be military forces deployed that had no secure comms at all. And they were preparing and planning for that. And at that time, space launch was one failure in 10 on average globally. In the US, in Russia, in China, I mean everywhere.
Yeah.
And so ULA was asked to first not go away. So Boeing and Lockheed had developed these two vehicles really driven by an anticipated commercial market that never materialized. And when I was at Lockheed running other programs and running other rockets, I'm looking at my friends over, on the Atlas program, taping $20-30 million checks to the side of rockets every time they delivered them to somebody, because when that fell apart, you couldn't make money. And these two companies just finally said, look, United States government, we can't make any money at this, and we're just going to have to get out. And the government said, well, if you get out, then the country has no access to space. We need you to find another solution. And so the solution was to consolidate the two rockets into a third company, ULA, and by doing that, get the costs down and be able to earn a living and support the United States government. They had very little commercial business at that time. And please be flexible so that whatever satellite shows up, whenever it shows up, you can fly it. Because normally you plan a satellite launch like 2 years in advance.
Yeah.
Right? And they did that, but then with these satellites being late, some early, different priorities, they just came in whatever random order. So this team was expected to be super flexible, and then please blow up fewer than 1 in 10, because these are really precious assets, especially coming out the way they are.
So they gave you a target. They said,
They
this
gave
is
a
the
target.
threshold.
And I'll be straight with you, cost was not part of that. There was, dear God, we're going to have giant capabilities on orbit that are gapped. You've got to fly reliably and be able to fly whatever we throw at you. And so that's what they did. And in fact, they did better than blowing up 1 in 10. They didn't blow up any.
Yeah.
And really good at swapping out payloads at the last minute. And they were a monopoly because those were the only two companies that had space launch vehicles, and that became one. And there wasn't anybody else mature enough to do it. And that served the nation well for almost 10 years before I got here.
Well, first, let me just say, you answered a far better question than whatever I asked. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And let's contextualize in where we are today, which is, the Atlas program kind of in its swan song here. I think it's 15 launches remaining for Atlas.
15 to go.
And you talked about the initial purpose, the national security focus, which has been the core of the company's mission since day one.
Yep.
Today, you're doing a commercial launch, and it's
Yes, we are.
and you're with Amazon.
Ask me why. Why am I doing a commercial launch?
Well, what I want to ask is how the company has evolved to the place where that's become an area of interest, if not focus, for you all.
Yeah. So I got here, I guess, 2014, so about 11 years ago, come August. And I was asked to come here because the owners realized that this was going to become a competitive environment. And the company wasn't positioned for that. And so, I'll be honest with you, I didn't want to come at first. I was already running a different business at Lockheed, and I thought the work I was doing was really important. I believed at the time that the country's, I'll say, policy with respect to China was hilariously wrong.
Ahead of your time.
Yeah, well, yes. So unfortunately, I would say I've proven to be right.
I know, isn't it? It's better to not be right sometimes.
Sometimes it is. And so I was busily off saying, well, I'm just going to get ready for this when it comes around. And the technologies I was working on were hypersonics, directed energy, and missile defense.
Okay, we got to come back to that because we still haven't solved any of those three. My goodness, we should have left you where you were, I think.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
And so I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm happy to do this. And then I was approached and said, we got this company ULA, and there's a new company on the table called SpaceX, and they're just starting to fly, and we think this is going to be a competitive environment. And ULA is not really set up for that. And, we got to give it a college try because it's a good business for the shareholders of those two companies and because the government wants us to because they're not ready yet. So can you go there and help? And my initial reaction was, no, I'm already doing important work. And I mean, I shouldn't say this, and my owner's going to see this, but I wasn't that interested in protecting the business for the shareholders. Now, don't get me wrong. I value a healthy business, and the business I was running at Lockheed was the largest and most profitable within its space sector. But I did that not to make money for shareholders. I did that because that's how you generate the resources to develop technology and attract talent to go work on that. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of chicken and the egg.
Yeah.
And so I went home and I talked it over with my wife, Miss Bruno, who's also a rocket scientist, by the way.
That's a power couple.
And she says to me, she goes, well, yeah, okay, well, it doesn't matter if ULA goes away. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, it does matter because the competitors are not really going to be ready to fly all the missions the country needs for probably the better part of 10 years. And it's not going to last that long. So it matters. And then she said, well, then you know what to do. So she was right. She changed my mind. And I came back. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And so I came in the summer of 2014. We kind of had three big challenges. I mean, the first was we were the wrong kind of monopoly to survive a change. Because there's kind of two kinds of monopolies. There's the monopoly of conquest, which is a company that had competitors and destroyed them and took over the marketplace. And a company like that is agile. And they're quick to spot competition and they're quick to adapt to it because they want to maintain their monopoly position. The other kind of monopoly is the monopoly of service. You're the only company there. And you end up developing a culture that's really focused on your customer and on your mission. And you're kind of blind to all that other stuff. Yeah. And that's the kind of company ULA was. And when I arrived, the people at ULA just didn't believe it. They're like, oh, those guys, they can't even fly half the missions yet. And they're hardly flying even once a year. And they're blowing up every now and again. We're not worried about them at all. The government will take care of us because we're the ones they depend upon. That was wrong. Yeah. But that was the culture. The other big problem we had is the most powerful man in Congress absolutely disliked us and wanted us gone. Senator McCain had passed a bill right before I reported to the job that outlawed the Atlas rocket via its RD-180 engine. And that
because the engine was from
Russia. And because Russia had just invaded Crimea. And I also think he just didn't like Luck. I mean, we're being straight here. I respect Senator McCain, who was a great American, but I think he hated my owners.
Very possibly true.
Yeah, well,
I can't disagree with that.
He kind of said so. And what is worse than, in his mind, than Boeing and Lockheed? Well, that'd be the redheaded stepchild of them, which was ULA. And so he wanted that engine gone. He wanted the rocket gone. I think he wanted us gone. And so he had passed a bill that year that did that. We were not allowed to fly an Atlas after 2017. And so rough first week on the job, my only viable product has been outlawed by an act of Congress and the company has to close.
Welcome to the show, Mr. Bruno.
Yeah, so a little harder than I thought it was going to be when I said, okay, I'll go and try and transform it.
Was your wife still sure it was the right decision at that point?
She was. My wife's a trooper.
Yeah, respect.
She's really great. And so the only thing we had to do then was to, develop a new rocket. So we had to get permission to do that. We had to do that, and we somehow had to finance it. So the permission part, that was relatively straightforward with the owners, provided we could figure out how to finance it. And the owners were going to do their best by the shareholders and by the government, but I think that one owner gave us like a 50-50 shot of getting through this. And like we were talking about before, most companies in that kind of disruptive environment that experience that they don't survive. I mean, the case studies are greater than 90% fail. So they had justification and believe in that, and they were leaning in to do this at all. I think the other owner gave us less odds than that. So how do I finance this thing? I can't go out and get external investment because of the structure of this joint venture, which is a separate company. So this is worth understanding for a moment. We're not the kind of joint venture where two companies collaborate on something and deliver a product. We're the kind of joint venture where they fired everybody, they got rehired into a new co with two shareholders. And that's what we have. And they're each 50-50. And it's a very stable ownership structure. And if you sell equity to bring in an investor, even if you sell 1%, you might think, oh, they're still in charge. It's 49.5 and 49.5 and some peewee at 1%. No, the 1% actually controls the company then. Because under the 50-50 structure, they have to agree on everything that's different. Or it doesn't happen.
So the 1% becomes a tiebreaker.
Yeah, you got it. And so it's just really not practical to bring in that 1%. And that means you don't have access to external capital. So how are you going to fund this thing? I need a whole new rocket. Heavy class space launch vehicles cost several $billion to develop. So we had to get creative. And the way we funded it was, first off, we had a modest level of IRAD that we were allowed to do that would not begin to touch this. The second big source was honestly our supply chain. So I went to my suppliers and said, hey, we're going to do a new rocket and we're going to stay in business and we're going to continue doing important work. And you probably want to be part of that, right? And they're like, yeah, no, we want to be part of that. And I go, well, all I need you to do is your part of the rocket that you're responsible for, you got to pay for all the development of that. And we sweetened the deal a little bit by saying, well, where I have multiple suppliers, we're going to consolidate into a smaller set. And so we ended up with what we call the Big Five. They got more work, in some cases twice as much work, but again, they had to pay for all of their own development. And that allowed us to close a business case that allowed our owners to say yes. Now, the big disadvantage of that financially, you have a business background.
A little bit, yeah.
So when you get an equity investor, they're usually investing because they think this business is going to grow and they're going to get a return on their investment in the future. And if you have a really generous set of investors, they might even let you sell the product initially for less than it costs to acquire market share, because as you grow, you can grow back in front of that and make money. When you do it the way I described, you can't do that at all. You get a company to invest to help you develop the rocket, and then you're going to buy an order from them. In that first buy, they're going to take that investment and they're going to lay it on top of the cost because they got to get it back. Mm-hmm. They're not in equity. They don't have any equity.
They're just reimbursable.
Exactly. So right there, you have a price disadvantage. And so you've got to try and design a rocket that is that much cheaper to be able to absorb that and have some other way of competing. In our case, you have to look at when you design a rocket, you're designing it for a specific purpose. And it is the most efficient, most cost-effective for that one thing. It can do other things, but that's the thing it's best at. And in our world, there's sort of two markets in heavy lift. There's a commercial market, which today is completely dominated by LEO. And back then, when I had to make this decision on what kind of rocket we were going to develop, I could see the LEO market coming. A lot of other people thought it was silly and it wasn't going to happen because the satellites in LEO spend all their time over the water and there's no customers there. But I thought the big technology that was going to make that possible were very tiny spacecraft so that you could launch them in mass quantities on big vehicles. And that brought the price point somewhere that was practical. So there's that market. And then there's the other market that we had traditionally served, which are exotic orbits for the United States government. And when you choose between those, you're like betting the farm.
High stakes.
High stakes, because it takes years and it takes billions of dollars. Yeah. And when you get all done, you got what you got. And you can't do it again. But in that particular situation, because I couldn't have equity investors and I couldn't have the price advantage that comes with that, I had to have a value advantage. And we were really good at that mission, and I could see everybody else heading for the other one. And so the choice was, let's differentiate from the crowd because we're not going to beat these guys on price. Let's go beat them on value. And so that's that is the mission we designed Vulcan for. And we went through that development cycle. We did all the other normal stuff they would have taught you at Harvard. I flattened the organization. I mean, the first thing I did was lay off almost half of the executives so we could be more agile and I could have decisions made closer to the action. We did the consolidation of the supply chain like I talked about. We simplified the product structure. I had 3 rockets in multiple configurations, over 50. It was like selling over 50 different rockets. That's Vulcan in like 4 flavors today. And we went all fixed price. We shed all this cost plus nonsense and went to commercial pricing. And then the last thing we did, and I mean in time order, I had to lay off a third of the workforce to get affordable, to generate the resources flying Atlases and Delta on contracts I already had, to invest the IRAD to develop Vulcan, to then grow back again later. So we did all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And with the big bet on Vulcan, that's sort of where we ended up.
And you've had a pretty big 2 weeks here. Vulcan certification for National Security Space Launch, big contract award last week. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
And so it's exciting. It seems like maybe the strategy is.
Thank God. Yes, I feel like it paid off. I mean, so first we won phase 2 with Vulcan. By the way, we bid Vulcan into phase 2 with just a few launches on the front end with the last of the Atlases. That was a multi-billion-dollar contract. Same kind of thing, 60-40 split. Yeah. We won 60. I was astounded. So was SpaceX. And so that felt good. But as you point out, I didn't actually have the rocket done yet or certified. So
it's okay. That's what they tell you in Y Combinator too. Is you gotta sell ahead of actually having the product.
Exactly. And of course, if
Elon would agree with that, I think. Yeah.
He is an amazing entrepreneur who takes big risks. That's his real talent, I think.
We don't have to go down that path anyway. So so you won phase 2, just now phase 3,
and now we have a rocket that is certified, and it had to be certified to win phase 3, and it did. So now I feel like, okay, finally the bet has paid off.
Yeah, that's got to be immensely rewarding. You said it's bet the farm. The upside, hopefully, is many more farms.
Yeah, I think so. And as you know, we also have a really large commercial business now with Amazon. Mm-hmm. And the rocket that's on the pad out there is an Atlas. It's one of the last 15 left. Mm-hmm. And they bought those 2, and we'll get them started with this, hopefully, this batch of 27 satellites tonight.
It's very exciting. Tell us, this is, if you're curious, for a layperson to look at this and say, well, hey, Amazon, Jeff Bezos has a space company. Why isn't Blue Origin launching this tranche? Why is it a ULA Atlas?
And it is a tranche, so they number them just like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 for the security, tranche 1, tranche 2. So we're in tranche 1, and urgency is the answer. We already had Atlases. I had 9 left, I think, when we entered into the deal with Amazon, and they bought them out. And Vulcan was first in line. Another opportunity we had that we drove to pretty hard over the years it takes to develop this was to show up kind of first in the marketplace with the new rocket, because everybody's got new rockets. Yeah. New Glenn, there's a Starship, there's an Ariane 6, and there's a Vulcan, and we were kind of racing to be there, and that paid off too, and that's why. So that's a very large order. That's 47 launches they purchased from us in total, counting the Atlases. And then, now we have resources that will also allow us to keep investing in technology, because it's a competitive environment.
Yeah.
You can't stand still and reliably fly Atlas 5s and Delta 4s for years into the future. You got to keep improving the product and improve your competitive position.
Yeah. Let's talk about the technology. I think it's super interesting, and kind of the elephant on the technology side of things, which I hope you're game to talk about, is the reusability piece.
Yeah, sure.
What is so hard about reusability, and why is that a decision or why is that something that ULA has made a strategic decision not to go after?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say it's not that hard, and I don't mean to demean the accomplishment of my competitor and the soon-to-be accomplishment of the other one. Everything in rocketry is hard, but it is something that's known, and it has been, flying back a first stage and landing has been done before. It's been done years and years ago. The hard part about it is the economic equation, and it's tied exactly to that original decision we talked about before. The two markets that we discussed are in two different places in space. The commercial market that's now 84% as of last year in LEO, that's a LEO rocket that finishes its job in LEO. Even if the satellite goes past that, takes a transfer orbit out to GEO, takes a transfer orbit out to Mars, the rocket's done in LEO. Mm-hmm. And so you design a rocket to do that. These other orbits, these exotic orbits, the rocket isn't done until it's there, all the way out to GEO, for example, as a quintessential example. Okay. And so if you're only going to fly out to LEO, you divide the work between the first and the second stage pretty evenly. The first stage doesn't even fly out of the atmosphere. You burn it out pretty early and pretty low so that you can hand off to the upper stage and get rid of that inert weight, and then you fly out to LEO. And some of these missions are only 15 minutes long, and they're never more than about 45 minutes or an hour. And you drop off satellite and you're done. Well, if you're going to separate your first stage that low in the atmosphere at that low a velocity and that close to the launch pad, the right form of reuse is definitely to save a bunch of propellant, and you can fly the whole stage home. And you can reuse it. I'm going to tell you something that you won't believe me, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway.
I like learning new things. Yeah.
All right. It's not that much cheaper. The business case for the investment required to get to that state of technology has a hard time closing in a reasonable amount of time. But here's what it does do for you. It allows you to turn them fast and achieve a pretty high launch rate. And I'm going to tell you that, in my opinion, those guys are all about the launch rate, not about the cost.
It's the Southwest Airlines of rocket launch.
You got it. Now, the other kind of rocket, the kind of rocket that we chose to do, because I couldn't compete on being super cheap with investors who'd buy me down below my cost, I had to compete on value because I was getting my investment from my supply chain, who immediately dumped it on the first contract, right? That kind of architecture is totally different. You're going to take the first stage and you're going to fly it all the way into space, because what you're trying to do is drop off an upper stage that isn't going to LEO. It's going from LEO to someplace else. So you want it to still be full of propellant. When you do that, that upper stage is 2 or 3 times higher in altitude, it's 3 times faster, and it's 10 times further away from the pad. And so with that, together with that staging ratio where you're not using the upper stage to help you get to orbit, if you leave half the propellant in that thing to fly it home with, first off, really hard to do because you're going super duper fast and you're really far away, but also your mass to orbit just collapses. It craters in that architecture. And so it is impractical and really unviable to use flyback reuse with that type of architecture. So we're going to reuse, just not the whole stage. What we need to do is to be able to burn up all the propellant. And so our approach is to burn up all the propellant and then separate off the back end of the booster, because that's where the engines are in the exotic thrust structure that holds all that together, because that's what's expensive. And everything north of that is just an empty aluminum tube that doesn't cost that much money. The only problem is, well, how do you get them back? Because if you just cut them off and they go crashing into the ocean, A, they're going to sink, and B, they're broken. So we needed a new technology that would allow us to get that stuff back. And that new technology is an inflatable hypersonic reentry shield. So
Hypersonics are back.
Hypersonics are back, which I happen to have some knowledge about. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to go technical on you.
Let's do it.
All right.
Stay with us.
Okay. So a traditional heat shield in this application is something called an ablative. It's big, it's heavy, it's thick, and it is burning away. That's what ablation is. So it's just like the movies where, the Apollo capsule's coming in and there's fire everywhere. And what's really going on is that ceramic or that carbon-carbon heat shield is burning off. It's ablating off, and literally it is burning off faster than the heat is conducting through it to the thing you're protecting. And it's impractical for the application that you and I just talked about for two reasons. One, it is really heavy and big. It's got to be several times bigger around than the thing it's protecting, obviously, right? Well, the rocket's already gigantic.
Yeah, it's a lot of space.
There's another problem. It's in the way. If I bolted a blade of heat shield on the bottom of my rocket, I'm covering my rocket engines. So you just can't use it. That's never been an option before until now. There's a new technology, which is an inflatable heat shield that doesn't ablate. And the breakthrough technologically is coming up with fabrics that are happy to be at those temperatures, and they don't have to be ablated off. They don't have to burn off. And so we're able to package this thing up, and we store it right next to the engines, and when they're all burned off and cut off, we cut it off the back of the motor, then we inflate this thing, and it re-enters.
Yeah.
And then we pop out parachutes, we land in the water. This giant inflatable heat shield is a great raft, and then you just go pick it up with a boat. We demonstrated this in half scale on an Atlas almost 2 years ago now, and it worked perfectly.
It's pretty cool.
So we're just going to scale it up, and that's what Vulcan will get.
It's exciting, and it begs the question of diving into a little bit of your research and development process here. You say, it's a new technology. Is that something that was developed in-house by ULA's version of Skunkworks? Is that something that was developed in the academy or in another format that you all have adopted for your use case? How does that tech development process work?
Yes.
All the above.
So
that's what happens when I ask 4 questions at once.
Yes,
It's an easy
is.
answer.
It was a team effort with NASA. So again, in our business model, no outside investment, none of these equity guys. So I have to make do with the amount of money I can earn.
I'm hearing that's a chip on your shoulder, isn't it?
No, it's just a reality.
Yeah.
And it makes us take a different path through the business approach. And so we team with somebody on everything. And in this case, we team with NASA because they have a need for a thing like that to put really large objects on Mars.
Yeah.
And of course, we have a need for, believe it or not, our 60-foot diameter HIAD is only half the size of what they need. And that's because there's very little atmosphere on Mars to do the deceleration. So we teamed up on that. They developed the fabrics together with another company, and we developed the application. And then we collaborated on the flight test demo I described. And we'll kind of, we're still working together, but we're kind of now taking it from there for our application.
It's fascinating because we spend a lot of time on this program talking about companies on the other side of this equation, which is the companies that, maybe develop this interesting polymer and they're like, hey, there are 62 different use cases. Where should I invest? I have scarce resources. Where should I invest? But I think when it works well, and this is why one of the partnership as a strategy for scientists, for companies, for everything is really interesting. You all have clear needs. Working with, not necessarily opposed to, the folks who have these customer relationships, have these contracts, have the experience in the field, is a really valuable path to market.
I think so. And one of the things we work really hard at is to stay connected to the community of all of these small startup companies, because we're always looking for that technology that we're going to be able to partner with somebody and use. We talked about reuse, but we have big ideas for in-space transportation and what we could do with this amazing upper stage. It is the longest endurance, highest energy upper stage in the world, bar none. There's nothing else close to it. And that's a great place to start from.
Yeah.
But we're always looking for that edge, right? How do we make it last longer? How do we make it more maneuverable? What could we do with it? And who could we partner with to do that?
Yeah. I'm fascinated by that. I mean, I know parent companies, both Boeing through their corporate venture arm and partnership with AEI, Lockheed through their corporate, their CVC has done some of this work. What does that process actually look like? You described one kind of leg of the stool in terms of partnering with these other companies.
Yeah.
What are the other elements of your kind of R&D and future-focused development process?
Yeah, so it's like any other company. We have an R&D group. We call them advanced programs. We have to be, in a way, maybe more like a small startup in that we can't kind of fool around and start a bunch of stuff and just see what happens. We have to have a very clear eye about what we're trying to drive to, because we have to be frugal with these resources. So we have a whole map laid out. When do we need this thing? What is the thing? What are the technologies that will make it work? Who are we going to sell it to? And we're marching through this with a set of partners and, honestly, cobbling together every nickel we can find. And every time we get an extra nickel, we put it in there and we go that much faster.
Yeah. I am struck by your forward-looking kind of energy and ambition. Where Tori, thinking back where you were in 2014, you came in, you said, "Hey, this company needs to be here for the country." You've, in many ways, I think, traversed at least one, if not two or three, kind of valleys of death, right, in your time here. What's still motivating you? What's still driving you?
It is the national security space mission and where I think that threat is going to. And it's the opportunity that actually that mission, Amazon, you might not think of this. You might think, oh, it's a commercial, it's not their core. But I think of it a little bit differently. The ubiquitous availability of information, which a proliferated LEO, low latency, high bandwidth constellation can bring, is a game changer across the planet where we have populations living under authoritarian governments. When you're North Korea, when you're China, you can control access to the internet and what's on it. When it is delivered from space, that's much more difficult to do. And the way I think about it is that ultimately what we're all trying to do here is serve the cause of human dignity. And I believe that freedom is the ultimate form of that, and you cannot be free until you are first free in the mind. And so even this Amazon purely commercial mission, to me, is an extension of our American foreign policy and our leadership in the world to bring democracy and to bring freedom to everybody across the planet. So I see it all the same way. When I look at China specifically, for a long time I felt that our thought process around space threats was shallow, I'll be honest with you. And for a long time people thought of nothing more than some level of proliferation. I'll have more than one target for them to shoot. And then as they thought really, really hard, they said, well, maybe I'll put some extra propellant on that satellite so I can move around a little bit, and I'm done. Fortunately, the Space Force is an example of the country thinking a lot more deeply about this and realizing that it's a much more complex problem to solve and that it's going to take a lot more than just that to make this happen. Now, one of the things that I've done throughout my career is to try and look ahead to what is actually going to be needed to see those big trends, those big patterns.
You called Leo.
I called Leo.
So what's next?
I haven't been wrong yet. Actually,
this
sounds kind of crazy, but no, I haven't been wrong yet.
Wow.
And so
can we confirm? Is this true?
I really haven't. And so I'm looking forward into the space regime with the ever increasing Chinese threat. And I think there's a set of capabilities that we require if we're going to stay ahead of that and keep the peace. And those are the things, when we talked about advanced programs and IRAD investments, those are the things I'm working on. And I've been working on them ever since I got here, even when we were on the Hill saying, please change McCain's law, give me a couple more years so I can develop the replacement for the rocket. And, please, suppliers, join me in this. And by the way, when you're getting equity, guys, you can get enough to get going. And if you get more, you go faster. You have to get all of them when you're doing it this way.
Yep.
You can't deliver half a rocket. They've all got to buy in.
Power of persuasion.
Even when we're doing all of that, the whole time, we've had a vision for what we're eventually going to need in space as a capability to keep the peace. And I've been working on it the entire time. A lot slower the first 8 years because all the energy was going into Vulcan, and faster now.
Let's make your bet. You got to keep the company alive to be able to fight those battles.
Yes, well, and since we're a value offering, not a low cost offering, we have to continue to figure out what are those really important missions and have the technologies for them.
So if you're willing, I think I would love to do Tori's call for technology, Tori's call for startups here. I mean, the investors do this all the time, but you're the guy making you have a great view of this, and you're the one who needs suppliers and partners. Do you have a couple of ideas? Because there's a lot of folks watching
What
this
do I wish
who
people
are
were
interested
working on?
in starting companies or working for companies. What's your wish list?
Yeah, so I do have a wish list. So I'm looking for near term. I'm looking for cryogenic propellants that can be made to last a really really long time on orbit. So ways of extending that life. I'm looking for very high power efficiency methods of doing through space transportation. So think about it as the attitude control and maneuver of those systems, low power comms that are encrypted and jam proof.
And this is because of the contested domain?
You got it.
Okay.
That's all near term. Longer term, I want things like nuclear thermal propulsion so that we will have tremendous endurance. That builds on the first thing because, we'll use a cryogenic to fuel that reactor as the propellant for the reactor. And so that's the next thing. And I need nuclear power generation as well as nuclear propulsion. So companies out there, where's the camera? Companies out there who are working on a long-term storage of cryogenics and in-orbit, in-space propellant transfer, double down. And you guys with ideas for small nuclear power generation and very efficient and safe nuclear propulsion, give me a call.
I love that. Nuclear seems to be having a moment right now. There's a bit of a nuclear renaissance brewing, and a number of companies, whether it's nuclear or power centers in space or data centers in space or nuclear data centers in space altogether. Just there's a couple of these companies that I think we see cropping up. So when you're ready, we'll get them in touch here.
Awesome.
All right, let's do rapid fire round if you're cool.
Sure, yeah.
Cool. Couple questions and just short answers for us. So, first is what is an underrated CEO skill in the national security or space domain?
Oh yeah, people management. In the national security space realm, technology is center stage, and it's all hard and it's all cutting edge, and so you end up focusing on the things. And in launch, especially, you have these massive capital infrastructures and investments that go with them. So again, stuff. The secret is none of that's worth a damn thing if you don't have the skilled, dedicated people who know how to use them. So it's really only about people.
What about a book that's influenced your philosophy on this?
That's influenced my philosophy. Well, I'm going to share my COVID embarrassment, right? So everybody had something weird in COVID.
Yeah.
People chain watch Tiger King and stuff like that.
Every time you said exotic mission, I'm thinking about Joe Exotic.
Yeah, exactly. I read every book that Teddy Roosevelt wrote and probably about a dozen books written about him.
Wow.
And I found that very inspiring because, he's not as popular historical figure today, so I think people know less about him.
One of the most interesting for sure.
But one of the most interesting. He did all kinds of different things. I probably related to him because he went off and he was a rancher for a while, and that's how I grew up. Yeah. But he also had a vision for the country, and I would say sort of an internal North Star about what was right.
Yeah.
And he dedicated himself to that. He walked away from wealth to make it happen.
And he gave us the national parks.
He gave us the national parks.
Which, I know space is cool, but on Earth, it's about as good as it gets.
I think so.
Is there a favorite of the book? Since you've kind of surveyed the literature, is there one that you recommend?
Yeah, so I really liked, I'll give it to you in two categories. Okay. There's a 3-book series. I forgot the name of the author off the top of my head.
This is such a hard question because I know you always know, you're like, oh, I had a great experience. But then when someone asks you, you
can't remember. And it is kind of the quintessential 3-volume biography, and it is the best. But I also loved his book called African Game Trails, where he went on an expedition for the Smithsonian Institute with his son and took pictures and collected specimens that are, when we go to the Smithsonian and we see the natural history exhibits, that's almost all him. And the book was super fun, and it's got lots of pictures. And whenever he wrote a book, he did not write the way he interacted with people. He was very worried about being taken seriously as a naturalist. And so they're kind of dry, And there's one in there where he's telling a story. He goes, well, this leopard charged my son, and we managed to see it and shoot it, sadly, but shot it, and it fell down dead on his boot. And then that was like 2 sentences and he just moved on like it was no big deal.
Some stuff's just different. Yeah, I remember, I think it was during the presidential campaign, a picture came out of Mitt Romney had his dog on top of the car.
Oh,
And
yeah,
this was
yeah.
Things change fast. What's the biggest thing that people get wrong about ULA?
Oh, yeah. I think people, what they get wrong about ULA is that we're not creative and we're not high tech and we're not out here kind of pushing the limits because we're not a very flashy company and we don't think about, marketing and photo ops and the things that make that visual impression on people. We forget about it because, we're down, head down doing the engineering.
Well, you're here talking to me, so I appreciate it. You alluded to this a little bit. What is a piece of technology, it doesn't have to be rocket technology, that you're most excited about?
Oh, really? Oh, most excited about? Yeah, I am really excited about nuclear power because I see that in space as unlocking the potential of the natural resources that are on the moon and on the near-Earth objects that are just beyond that orbit. We didn't talk about this. We talk about near term and then longer. Well, this is further out. When we think about natural resources here on Earth, we're thinking about that finite set and how we conserve them and how, honestly, we imagine how we can live smaller and smaller lives until we eventually deplete them and our civilization ends. I mean, that's what we're really talking about. And yet, I mean, like right there, like a week away from this room in space is an imagination defying level of abundance of natural resources. It will change the destiny of our species. And beyond that, there is more inside the solar system. And the key to unlocking all of that, practical transportation system, nuclear power generation that we can take wherever we go in space and use here on the Earth, by the way, that's the technology I'm most excited about.
That's pretty awesome. I was going to ask you one more question, but that's just such a good place to leave it.
Okay.
Tori, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm inspired by not only your foresight, but your self-reflective ability to kind of look critically at where you've been and where you're going, and really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today.
It was my pleasure. It was fun.
Well, good luck out there this afternoon. We'll hope
Thank you.
for a launch. Thank you, sir.
You bet.